Have you ever had that moment where you walk into a room and suddenly you feel exposed? Maybe you're late to class, maybe you wore something slightly different than usual, or maybe you just tripped walking up the stairs. Instantly, your mind says, "Everyone saw that. Everyone is staring." That sinking feeling is a psychological illusion. Psychologists call it the spotlight effect, the tendency to think we are being noticed and judged more than we really are. It's as if there's an invisible stage light shining down on us at all times, exaggerating every move, every flaw, every mistake. But here's the truth: most people are far too focused on themselves to notice you at all. This idea comes from the work of social psychologists Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky in the late 1990s. Their most famous experiment is simple but revealing. They asked students to wear a very embarrassing t-shirt, one with Barry Manilow's face printed on it, a singer most of the students considered cringe-worthy. Now, the students wearing the shirt were convinced everyone would notice and laugh at them. They predicted at least half the people in the room would point it out. But when the researchers asked the other students, only about 23% even noticed the shirt at all. What felt humiliating to the wearers barely registered in other people's minds. Think about what that means. Our perception of being seen is often double or even triple the reality. We feel magnified in people's minds when really we're just one of many background details in their day. But the spotlight effect doesn't just apply to clothing or awkward moments. It shapes the way we experience public speaking, social media, relationships, and even failure. Take public speaking, one of the most common fears. People often imagine the audience scrutinizing their every word, every pause, every stutter. But research shows audiences don't notice most of these things, and when they do, they forget quickly. The speaker feels like a nervous wreck. The audience remembers almost nothing except the big ideas. The same thing happens in social media. You post a photo and agonize over every detail. Is the lighting good? Do I look awkward? Will people notice that small thing in the background? But most people scroll right past, giving it a second of attention at most. The spotlight you imagine shining on your post isn't real. It's your mind exaggerating the level of attention you're receiving. So, why do we do this? Why do humans constantly feel watched? Psychologists believe it's tied to egocentrism, not in the selfish sense, but in the fact that our own experiences are at the center of our consciousness. We live life from a first-person camera angle. Our thoughts are the loudest to us. Our mistakes echo in our heads. So naturally, we assume they echo in other people's heads too. But here's the catch. Everyone else is living in their own movie. They're starring in their own story, worrying about their own lines, their own mistakes, which means they don't have time to obsess over ours. Philosophy has a lot to say here too. The Stoics, for example, believed we waste too much energy worrying about other people's opinions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You're afraid of being forgotten. You will be. You're afraid of being talked about. You will be. And soon enough, then remember, they're just as temporary as you are." The Stoics knew what psychology would later prove, that people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think. But here's the interesting part. The spotlight effect doesn't only apply to embarrassment. It also applies to achievement. Think about the last time you did something you were really proud of. Maybe you scored well on a test, or performed on stage, or finally hit a personal fitness goal. You probably felt like everyone should notice, like the world should celebrate your achievement. But in reality, the attention is short-lived. People might clap, they might congratulate you, but then they go back to worrying about themselves. And that can feel disappointing, unless you flip the perspective. Once you accept that other people's attention is fleeting, you start to live less for external validation and more for internal fulfillment. There's also a social upside to understanding the spotlight effect: compassion. When we realize how much time people spend worrying about themselves, we can see them differently. The person who seems cold at a party, they're probably caught in their own spotlight, anxious about how they look. The friend who cancels plans, maybe they're not thinking about you at all. they're stuck in their own head, battling their own fears. Recognizing the spotlight effect in others helps us become less judgmental and more empathetic. And practically, the awareness of this bias can be life-changing. Imagine walking into a gym for the first time. Many people avoid gyms because they're terrified of being judged. They feel like everyone is watching, critiquing, silently laughing. But the spotlight effect tells us that most people are too focused on their own workout, their own form, their own insecurities. And once you internalize that, the fear melts away. The gym stops being a stage and starts being a place for growth. So how do we use this knowledge? First, remind yourself, other people aren't watching you as closely as you think. When you catch yourself replaying an embarrassing moment, recognize that the memory lives mostly in your head, not theirs. Second, flip the spotlight. Instead of obsessing over how you're being perceived, put your attention on others. Listen deeply in conversations. Be curious. Shift the focus outward. And third, take risks. Once you accept that people won't remember your little mistakes, it becomes easier to try new things, to fail publicly, to live boldly. The spotlight effect is a psychological illusion, but breaking it is a philosophical practice. It means realizing that life
isn't a stage with a single spotlight. It's more like a crowded street at night, everyone carrying their own flashlight, mostly shining it on themselves. You're not under constant surveillance. You're just one of many, and that's liberating. So next time you trip, stutter, or make a fool of yourself, remember this: the moment feels unforgettable to you, but to everyone else, it's already gone. And that means you're free. Free to experiment, free to fail, free to live without the crushing weight of imagined judgment. The spotlight effect isn't about being invisible. It's about realizing you don't have to perform all the time. The spotlight was never really on you.